Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. Let's talk about what's going on in the world. Okay, so inflation is at a 40-year high. The core inflation rate is the highest that it's been in 40 years, and it's only going to get worse in the winter when we start using more energy. Gas prices were down in September, which is why the inflation rate was marginally lower than the month before, but now gas prices are going to start going up. We're starting to drain the strategic oil reserves. So it's only the beginning. You see, the earth is contracting. Even if by some stroke of luck, we'll say, by some stroke of misanthropic luck, the population of the human race is halved over the next 10 years, the energy consumption will be doubled. If we don't have it, our energy consumption will likely triple because the developing world is trying to catch up. And what that means is that the countries who hold the resources, the countries that can produce food, that have a lot of natural gas, that have a lot of oil, that have the ability to grow food, those are the people who are holding the cards. And that is why you can expect the prices that you're seeing right now, the things are never ever going to be cheaper than they are right now. There might be a few little ebbs and flows and oscillations, but by and large, the prices from here on in are going to skyrocket for everything that you enjoy. Now, hopefully, by the time things become unaffordable, we'll all be in the matrix and we'll all be content eating sludge and enjoying the virtual reality that will replace the natural one. Hopefully we can get there. I'm going to be interviewing Nate Hagens on the channel soon. This guy is just a wealth of information with regards to the coming energy wars, or to the ongoing energy wars, we should say. And as we're entering this multipolar world, and as the climate chaos continues, like right now in California, we got tomato crops wiped out, vegetable crops wiped out due to the drought in Florida. You have orange crops decimated, beyond decimated. I think they're down like 35% because of the recent hurricane there. And all of these things just compound and culminate into the perfect SHTF shitstorm. And that's before the whole nuclear war thing. But you see, the nuclear war issue, it's a war for resources, right? It's a war. That's why this Nord Stream issue is so important. That's why that liquid natural gas is so important, is because it's a war of the superpowers to determine who is going to govern all the little impoverished countries. That's what it really boils down to, because those are your patrons, right? Now you have the United States, who's geographically isolated. That means we're probably amongst the most secure. When I say we, I mean North America. We are amongst the most secure nations on Earth. We got two massive oceans separating us. Trying to conquer the United States with conventional weapons is virtually impossible. That can't be said about countries in Europe and Asia, but that's where like 90% of global trade happens. It happens over there. And that's where the party is. And that's why Russia is in such an advantageous position, because all they have to do is make a pipeline, even though now I guess they have to defend those pipelines because we're in war, World War III. But they don't have to send things over on big expensive ships that need constant maintenance, and then you need to compress the natural gas into liquefied natural gas, and then you need to reconvert it into natural gas and all this kind of stuff. You need all of this infrastructure in order to get a more expensive product than the Europeans could just get cheaper if they could find some sort of way to negotiate with Russia. But we all know why that's not going to happen, because there are vying powers, and they all have different business interests. And I was talking with Brad from Full Spectrum Survival last night, and one of the things that he has said on his channel before is that as in good times, when everybody's making money, everybody gets along. But as soon as we hit a depressionary cycle, but I think this is more than a depressionary cycle because of all the things I just mentioned. I think that this is now going into, by and large, a constant stagflationary cycle where the price of everything goes up and your wage doesn't go up. Anyways, he says that, when times are good, countries will get along. But as soon as times get hard, as soon as people stop making money, that's when people start fighting with one another. And that's exactly what we are seeing materialize right now. So nothing that you do with respect to preparedness is going to be in vain at this point. I know it's very easy to be optimistic, especially in 2020 there, where hopes were flying high with the future of automation and all of this technology, which is going to just correct these problems. Like right now in California, they're talking about building a desalination plant in order to correct the water problem. Well, what is the problem with that? It requires energy, right? It requires more electricity that California simply doesn't have because everybody's starting to drive a Tesla now, okay? So there are a lot of problems. That's not to say that some of these problems can't be mitigated, but what you need to prepare for is endless material contraction, the likes of which the planet has never seen. All we have seen is growth. Now, the only thing that is going to be growing is the core inflation rate, okay? Yes, it's about money printing. Yes, it's about the phony baloney monetary system, but that whole edifice is built upon the foundation of material goods, services, resources, raw materials, human resources. If you don't have that stuff, you simply don't have anything, and you're a service economy just on life support, on the life support of all of the other countries that are actually doing stuff, like China. Take China, for instance. People like to laugh at the Chinese military. I don't know why, because quite frankly, we don't truly know exactly what they have because we don't have any nuclear treaties with them. For all we know, they have 10,000 nuclear warheads that are far bigger and more destructive than the Russians. But people like to say, oh, China's never gonna, it's gonna take them years. China is exponentially greater of an economy than the German economy was in the 1930s. And Germany created one of the largest militaries the world has ever known in the span of just a few years. So what do you think the Chinese can accomplish under their own authoritarian regime, where the people there will sit idly by while a guy in a protective hazmat suit wields a shotgun 3 years in to a pandemic that has a very low lethality rate? What do you think they can accomplish? We're talking about a country who can build skyscrapers in literally 48 hours. Whether you think they're good craftsmanship or not, that's not the point. The point is that this was done before in history in rapid time. Don't think that they cannot mobilize their country towards the purpose of war in a lightning fast. So I'm talking like a year or so. I mean, they already have a very capable military, and it's concerning right now because Taiwan has just reiterated that they have this new red line in place, that if the Chinese make any more incursions into their airspace, which recall the Chinese have been doing now for the last, as long as I can remember anyways, they've been taunting the Taiwanese, they will consider that an act of war and they will actively engage the Chinese. Now, this may well be suicidal for Taiwan, to be brutally honest. They may be sucking the tailpipe of Western media and believing what they are seeing and actually thinking that the Russians are losing the conflict when it's anything but that. I mean, in the last few days, on the first day, they're like, oh yeah, the Russians are running out of missiles. That's why they're shooting all these missiles. Okay, logic. Second day, they shoot even more missiles. Today, they shot even more missiles. Back in June, they were supposedly running out of these precision-guided missiles. So when are they going to run out of missiles? That is the big question. Any day now, Russia is going to run out of missiles. They're never going to run out of artillery. They're never going to run out of missiles. They have all the components to build them, and they have the human resources to do it, and they also have the War Mobilization Powers Act to do it. So, I mean, just throw that idea out the window. This winter, shit is going to hit the fan in Ukraine, and you're going to watch the media go silent unless they double down and start sending troops to the front line. Now, I've been getting some emails from people from all over the world that attest to the fact that militaries are on high alert. They're seeing a lot of military activity. Now, I know a lot of this is anecdotal, it's confirmation bias, but I believe it's reached a saturation point where we can say with certainty that this is not just coincidence, okay? That there is actually some increased level of not only conventional military readiness, but also nuclear military readiness. Now, some very, very stern words were said today by, who is it? By Joseph Borrell, who's a European Union and Foreign Affairs and Security Policy analyst, or sorry, he's a representative of that agency. And he basically said this. He said it has to be clear that any nuclear attack against Ukraine will create an answer. Not a nuclear answer, but such a powerful answer from our military side that the Russian army would be annihilated. Now, if you recall, David Petraeus, the retired Army general and the former director of the CIA, said this exact same thing just a couple weeks ago. Now, is Joseph Borrell, is he actually just echoing what he said? Is he just copying what he said because that's what he heard? Or are they getting their information from someone in the higher-ups? Now, if the Russian army is annihilated, recall the Russian nuclear doctrine. If you annihilate the Russian military, it doesn't say this explicitly, but it basically says that any threat to Russian sovereignty can be grounds for using nuclear weapons. So perhaps Joseph Borrell is unaware of this, or they're perfectly aware of this and they're playing a nuclear game of chicken. Because saying that you're going to annihilate the Russian military is exactly the same as saying that you are going to retaliate with nuclear weapons. You have Macron and all these guys saying, oh, we're not going to use nukes, we're just going to destroy the Russian military. Okay, I mean, you're only one or two steps removed from full-blown nuclear warfare at that point. Now, one thing that a lot of the pro-Russian people on YouTube are saying, they're always saying this. They're like, Putin never said we're going to use nukes. And, you know, he never explicitly stated that we will use tactical or nuclear weapons. But it's incredibly implied. And you're being very disingenuous if you can't read between the lines of what he's saying. Then you have guys like Dmitry Medvedev, whose rhetoric on a nuclear level has become incredibly inflammatory with respect to his use of words like apocalyptic and Armageddon. And he's distinctly used the words nuclear before. Lavrov has used the words nuclear before. Many of them have used the word or have made clear, obvious allusions to the fact that they will use nuclear weapons. So to pretend like they've never said this or there's no Russian threat of using nukes is naive. That's not to say that we necessarily think the Russians are in a position yet where they need to. We're going to find out this winter. We're going to find out real soon once Russia fully mobilizes along the line and whether or not, you know, they're going to have to resort to that. Because right now, the Ukrainian counteroffensive has basically all but ground to a halt. And you'll notice now that they're surreptitiously in the media starting to shift towards defense. They're starting to shift towards, well, maybe we need to, all these countries now are sending missile defense systems, right? Every single, before it was talking about offensive capabilities. Now they're in the mode of defense. So the question is, are they going to stay in that mode of defense and not provide Ukraine with the means to wage offensives? And are they going to cease with any sort of activity, asymmetrical attacks on critical infrastructure? Will they cease with that activity? Or is there going to be, you know, the delivery of long-range missile systems to Ukraine to start to take it to the Russians once again? As I said before, all is fair in war, but these are all things to consider. Now, before we get in some emails here, I just want to go over some of the events of the day, some things that I've been noticing, and some things that are in the news. So, Russian Security Council Deputy Secretary Alexander Venedikov has said that Zelensky's calls for preventative strikes against Russia are essentially a call for World War III. And this is from one of Russia's more distinguished news agencies that doesn't post a lot of sensational stuff like RT does. And that's why that's kind of concerning, because when you hear that news agency using the words or the word string World War III, then you know it's getting serious. Now, they even say that Russian officials have never voiced a threat to use any weapons of mass destruction, which is complete and utter bullshit. Let's be brutally honest. Anybody who says they haven't is being disingenuous. They haven't said it explicitly because it's not the kind of thing that you're ever going to say. You want to maintain that whole strategic ambiguity thing, right? Yeah, so that's nonsense. And you have Dmitry Medvedev, like I said before. This guy, I don't know if he's been drinking too much or what, but this is some of the things that he says. The elderly leaders of Washington Regional Committee and the newbies from NATO should at least occasionally activate their softened brains. He always has something really cheeky to say. The fastest way to escalate in the conflict in Ukraine is to the irreversible consequences of a world nuclear war is to equip the psychos in Kiev with long-range missiles. Mr. Former president and possibly president in the future, if he's definitely one of the guys who would be in line for the throne should Putin decide to retire. He did say something very interesting here. This was a quote that he said, and this is totally getting philosophical out of nowhere, but he said this. He says, "As they say, not from a great mind, but from a pure heart, you shall learn the truth." Interesting. Very interesting. I agree with that. Sometimes you get more truth. Some people just baffle you with bullshit. And a lot of the people who are very, very fast talkers, quick-witted, and, can use a lot of words and have this lexicon this big, when you really break down to the substance of what they're saying, you listen to these people talk for an hour and you realize, I never took anything from that. I don't remember a word you said, but it sounded really intelligent. That's probably because it's all bullshit. Macron has reiterated that they will not use nuclear weapons. Now, this is interesting, right? It's interesting because it's not strategically ambiguous to say that we will not use nuclear weapons, which is basically almost giving Putin and Russia a license to use nukes and not worry about a nuclear response. So I'm very curious if he's going to walk back this statement, because it's out of line with it's out of sync with the United States policy, and who, of course, is basically 90% of NATO. And, of course, there's still that thing that even if they don't claim they're going to use nuclear weapons, they're going to destroy Russia's military with conventional weapons, which, of course, leads to nuclear war. And stay tuned, guys, because we have a lot of emails that we need to go over here, which talk about a lot of the things that we've been talking about lately with respect to what people are seeing in terms of nuclear preparations. Okay, stuff I probably should have put first in this video because it's more sensational and catchy, but I'm just kind of riffing here, and hopefully people are willing to sit through the whole video. U.S.-Russian relations can't get any worse, says Moscow, according to Sergei Lavrov. Very interesting. Did you know that this is the 60-year anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis? When we came, I believe it was October 1st was when we came closest, at least overtly, to nuclear war. There was a point there where there was a standoff between a submarine and the U.S. Navy, and we were so close, we're getting ourselves into that predicament very, very soon, when we're going to have more troops deployed to the Baltic states, to Poland, to Romania, right around the time when Russia is cleaning house in Ukraine. And it won't be long before Russians are looking right across the border into the eyes of American soldiers. It won't be long. Now, funny thing here is that Joe Biden said that he would talk to Putin at the G20, but only about Brittany Griner, the basketball player who was arrested on weed charges. Now, isn't it a coincidence that he decided to pardon all the people who have had weed possession charges right while this whole thing was happening. Isn't that interesting? So now they can go and say that, oh, this is like, you know, in a legitimate law, and, you know, we're a more ethical society than you because our laws are more mature and advanced. What perfect timing, you know, to go and have a conversation about someone who's arrested on. I don't agree that she should do 9 years for possession of weed. I think that's stupid. I think that's an idiotic law. Maybe you could provide some sort of justification, but in any country where booze is legal, let's not have that argument. I just think it's a dumb waste of money. We got enough problems than putting people in jail for that kind of thing. There's a cholera outbreak in Syria. All the more importance of learning water filtration and making sure that you have at your disposal some ability to purify water and just get the bacteria and the viruses out. That's the most important thing. Getting the metals and all that stuff, you know, I mean, that's going to kill you in the long run, but the most important thing in survival is bacteria. Second to that is viruses. If your water filter does that, that's all that matters. What else do we got going on here? I think that's about it for that kind of stuff. Okay, so let's get into the emails. Now, somebody who's a very good inside source on the Zaporozhye power plant situation has sent me a message about 11 Tu-160 Russian heavy bombers which have been placed on the Finnish border. Now, we've talked about this briefly, but I didn't realize that there was 11 there. And obviously, this is posturing. This is reminding NATO that, hey, you know, we have. And this is why when Blinken says the Russians haven't changed their nuclear stance, clearly they have. Because these nuclear capable bombers weren't there just a while ago. And it's a testament to the fact that the Russians are holding on to a lot of their good stuff. If you recall, a couple days ago, I made a video where it shows you a map of all of the positions of all of the Russian military equipment, or at least, you know, what's known about. And the majority of their equipment, especially their more modern weapons, aren't even close to Ukraine yet. So this funny bunny stuff about, you know, how they're going to run out of weapons is just it's just cope. That's all it is. And like I said, guys, pride comes before the fall. If the people you watch, if the bulk of their argument consists of just straw man attacks and ad hominem attacks and just making generalizations about the Russian people as a whole, and, you know, emotional appeals, you know, look, I have kids, and the night of those bombings that happened recently in Ukraine, I looked at my kids while they were sleeping, and I'm like, man, I couldn't imagine what it must be like to have to lose a child to something like that. And I totally understand that, but you can't be also bamboozled by the emotional appeals that they make. And there's a lot of unexplained things with respect to that, like the targeting of a... Anyways, I'm not going to get into that because I might potentially shoot myself in the foot if I start talking about what is actually going on the ground. I like to keep a wide angle vision of this kind of thing. That way you got to also be a moving target when you're talking about this stuff, guys. Apparently out in BC, somebody has said that the Kitimat LNG facility is taking up all the workers. Apparently Canada all year has been fast-tracking the LNG facility with massive investment for over a year now. And he says this is very coincidental considering the energy crisis that is happening right now. Not a coincidence whatsoever. People know. This one is interesting, guys. I want to keep this brief. I work at a small lab for a university, and our past few shipments of Romoplastim, common name M-plate, has been canceled. Now, this is important. This is useful for some of our research regarding platelet coagulation proteins, but is also useful for acute radiation poisoning. And yes, N-plate is one of the, if not the main ingredient, but I recall when I was covering that story about the US government buying $300 million worth of acute radiation sickness medication, that the N-plate was a big factor with that. So this guy is saying that they can't get it because the government is buying it all for their emergency stockpiles preparing for World War III. to put it lightly. What else do we got going on here? I got a message from Australia. Apparently there's lots of military activity going on there. I think Australia, with these nuclear submarines, ultimately the nuclear submarines that they're building are going to be nuclear armed submarines. I could foresee Australia going nuclear. They're going to have to. That's the only way they're going to be able to protect themselves from the Chinese moving forward. And that's why they're building all these nuclear submarines. Of course, Australia has been providing Ukraine with a lot of weapons, but they're just saying that they're seeing heightened military activity in Australia as well. And yes, more from the UK, more activity, military activity. Somebody referencing information that they heard about plane loads of soldiers heading to Poland every day for the last 3 months. Well, I know that the U.S. has committed a large contingent of military forces to that region. So I'm sure that doesn't all happen at once. It takes time. And if you commit even 5,000 troops, if you think about it, 100 a day, that's 50 days. I mean, it takes a long time to mobilize. And that's just a testament to the fact that, everybody says this Russian mobilization is botched and it isn't going well. Well, you think about what they're trying to do. I mean, hundreds of thousands of troops to move them into position is no joke. That takes a long, long time. This other person here who has a Polish background and lived or has visited the USSR quite frequently attests to the fact that they are a nuclear-ready culture. Okay, he says his girlfriend in St. Petersburg knew where her bunker was, what she was supposed to bring, and what they were supposed to have prepared for at home. They did month-long training to take people into the bunkers. This is all Russia now. Every Russian, show them where they're going to sleep and show them where their children are going to go when everything is organized. Russians are not stupid. They know how to organize. They are never overconfident. They lived through too many wars. They have all the food storage in their home, not for days, but for months. In their cottage areas, they have more food stored. In the dacha, it's just the way that people live. Indeed, they have a culture of preparedness, which is why that release on the alternative media yesterday about how Russians were being sent out these pamphlets on how to prepare for nuclear war. That's actually quite commonplace, and it's taught in schools there. You won't hear that taught in schools here, and that should be a sign to people that this is still a very real threat, and it's very easy for us when we're separated by two oceans and we've never been invaded. And this is something people always need to keep in mind when you're trying to understand the Russian psyche, is that we've never been invaded before. I mean, maybe, you could say like the Mexican War and the British and all that, obviously we're still under colonial rule here. But in the United States, there's never really been a real existential threat. So we don't comprehend what it's like to have been invaded by all your borders. So there is a paranoid culture there, which is very justified. It's incredibly justified. And if people are going to minimize that, then they're stupid. He also made a comment about what I was talking about yesterday with the ban on Russian aluminum. All of these sanctions and bans and this economic war and the chip war, it's just going to raise the price of everything. Definitely going to raise the price in the short term. Now, in the long term, if technology some way, somehow is able to make up for the increased costs due to this deglobalization through automation, then we may start to see some plateauing of prices temporarily. However, the price of energy is going to continue to rise. Climate chaos is going to continue to unfold, which is going to make everything more expensive, and conflict is going to continue, thereby making everything more expensive. And when a lot of your resources are committed to tanks and bombs and all this stuff, that's all stuff that can't be used for consumer products and fixing factories and fixing food processing machines. When they break down, it takes 3 months instead of you know, 1 week to get the parts you need, because all the parts or all the metals are going into, you know, the war somewhere. So it's all, we have to keep viewing these things holistically. And I'll leave you with this final optimistic note. My name is so-and-so. What I'm about to tell you is very important. I'm a healthcare student in the US. In the past few days, we've been learning to treat radiation burns and how to use hazmat suits. I asked some of the juniors who took this class last year if they did this, and they said they never had to learn that. He says, yes, you can use this info on your channel. I'm also a part of a healthcare organization, I won't say which one, has offered disaster preparedness drills, etc. And yeah, so that's interesting. I don't know if that's really out of the ordinary. I mean, once again, it's an anecdote, but just adding to the body of evidence that they're preparing for something. And these people lie through their teeth. Remember when they said inflation was transitory? They really didn't lie, right? Because transitory could mean anything. You know, transitory in a decadal sense. Maybe that's what they meant. Because that's what we're looking at here. And think about it, even with the Fed raising interest rates to 5%, inflation is still sky high. And this is while we're depleting the strategic oil reserves. Imagine how much it's going to shoot up over the winter time. It's not looking good, which is why I encourage people, actually, I don't want to give you any financial advice, but what I'm doing right now is I'm not holding a lot of cash, put it that way. I'm trying to get inventory for the long winter ahead. We were able to secure a lot of winter well wood stoves. These are very well made stoves, because I am worried that there's going to be conflict on the Taiwan Strait. And once that happens, it's going to be, if you think, you know, shipping containers are expensive now, the decoupling hasn't even started yet. I mean, we're really at like 1%. I mean, even if we were to get to 10% decoupling, kind of like what we had during COVID, but permanently, if a war breaks out, you're just not going to be able to get stuff. There's not going to be waiting for 3 to 6 months. It's just, you're not going to get it. And the cost is going to be prohibitive for a lot of people. Anyways, guys, let me know what you think. Sorry to be so long-winded. If you want to support the channel, just, you know, keep on watching. I know everybody's a little pressed financially, so I'm not going to, you know, make any sort of sales pitches or anything like that. But we do have a store, CanadianPreparedness.com. And if there's things that you need from a prepping standpoint, that's the best way to support the channel. Like I always say, the best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up there. And if our prices are looking a little higher lately, that's because the price of freight and shipping just continues. Not so much overseas sea cans, but, you know, things like UPS, Purolator, FedEx, getting the shipment to you is costing just exorbitant amounts. But let me know if... let me know what you guys think about all this craziness. You guys take care. Stay safe. Canadian Prepper out.